guys, it's Casey, and today we're going to talk about the books I read in April. So April was not my greatest reading month by basically any metric. As far as number of books, I read less. As far as page numbers, I read less. And as far as ratings go, it was a lot lower than a typical month. So this was just like really not my month. So for April, I managed to read 5 books, which means that I did not actually read all 6 of the books that were on my TBR. So one of them is rolling over into this month. However, the books that I managed to read, I read 1 5-star read, 2 4-star reads, a 3-star read, and a 2-star read. So yeah, like I said, not my greatest month, but let's go ahead and talk about the books. So the very first book I read was Battleground, and Battleground is the 17th book in the Dresden Files series, and I have officially caught up to all of the ones that have been published. I'm in the know. I now am caught up with the Dresden Files. And this book was 4 stars for me. This is not my favorite Dresden book that I've read in a while, and I even actually considered giving this one a 3 stars before ultimately landing on a 4. So for the last time in a while, I'm going to say that broadly speaking, the Dresden Files is about Wizard for Hire Harry Dresden as he works as a private investigator and consultant for the Chicago Police Department to consult on all manner of crimes that may be perpetrated by some sort of supernatural entity or have some kind of weird magical element to them. 17 books in, we're well beyond that, but that's my pitch. And like I said in my March wrap-up, Peace Talks and Battleground were kind of set up to be 2 halves of the same story. While there is an overarching plot throughout the Dresden Files, normally the stories are kind of self-contained, whereas Peace Talks and Battlegrounds were kind of combined and just kind of chopped in half. So Battleground really did feel like the second half of a Dresden book in that it was just high action, high stress, high stakes the entire time. And even within that, I felt like the pacing managed to be alright. It wasn't that I had a problem with. I had a problem with several of the plot things that happened. There were some things that were done to certain characters that I am not a fan of. There were arrangements and things that changed as far as what things are going to be going forward, and that is as vague as I can possibly be. But I really just was not a fan of some of the choices that were made there. And there are some others that broke my heart, but ultimately might not be bad narrative choices, but I still think it's too early to tell. So like, some of it I'm reserving judgment on, and I think that's ultimately why I landed on a 4 instead of like a high 3 stars, is because I felt like until I see the ramifications of some of what happened, I can't judge it too harshly for that. But that being said, this is probably one of my least favorite Dresden books in a while. That doesn't mean it's an unsatisfying book. Like, it was still a very good book. It still came to an interesting conclusion, and I'm still very excited to see where we go from here. And the setup for future is very interesting, but I don't know, this one just didn't work for me quite as well. However, I did like some of the twists and some of the things that we ended up finding out in this one, so 4 stars overall. So the next book I read was Jade City by Fonda Lee, and I don't know if this was a me problem and just how I was feeling in April, but I gave this one 3.5 stars, and I am shocked that I did that. Because this book is one that is so well loved. I see basically everyone give it a 5 stars or a 4 stars, and I just couldn't do it. Like, I don't know if this was because my month was crazy busy and I just couldn't get into it, but I just couldn't get into it. I really enjoyed the writing style of this, and I felt like the setting was very interesting and unique. However, I struggled a bit with the characters, which I thought was interesting because a lot of the praise I'd seen was that some of the characters in this were really well done, and for me, I just couldn't find myself connecting to any of them. And because this is fairly centered on this one family, this one group of characters, while there is a very interesting and fast-moving plot, because it's so central to these characters, I found myself really struggling to connect with the story overall. That and some of the world-building elements, to me, I felt like I wanted more of an explanation on how the jade worked and how some of the magic worked. And overall, basically what it came down to is, while I enjoyed my time reading this book, this story isn't sticking with me as much as I wanted it to, and when I wasn't reading it, I found it kind of almost a chore to remember to pick it back up. But I did enjoy it while I was reading it. So like I said, this might be a product of how crazy busy and stressed out I was in April, and part of that is bleeding onto this book. But that's not necessarily the case for other books on this wrap-up. So take that with a grain of salt. This might be a me problem, but I did like this book, and it's not going to stop me from continuing on with the series because I am very interested to see where we go from here, and I am kind of invested in this world now. The next book that I managed to finish in April was Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson, and now this was 5 stars. Is anyone surprised? Because I'm not. So this is the second book in Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archive series, and I gave the first one 5 stars, and it was one of my favorite books of last year, and this one somehow manages to be better, and I'm just confused. how it's so good. The series is kind of hard to summarize just because it's so expansive, but basically it's set in this world where there used to be this order called the Knights Radiant who would protect humanity from what is known as desolations. And basically long after the Knights Radiants have kind of disbanded and been vowed as traitors, this follows a group of individuals as they find out that everything might not have happened the way that we thought it did, and they might be more involved with the Knights Radiant than they thought, and the next desolation might be coming. And it's just so good, guys. Like, there's so much hype surrounding Stormlight that I'm sure this is not like the push you needed to read it, but just in case it is, it's so good. Please read it. Oh my god. This is already probably one of my favorite books I've read this year, whereas Radiance was awesome. I felt like it really expanded on what we did in Way of Kings. I felt like a lot of the characters got new and interesting depth to them. What we'd established in Way of Kings, this did a good job of expanding on what we already knew while already telling us that some of the things that we learned may not be the case anymore, and it's just barely starting to see how some of these things might come together is really interesting, and I feel like we're still only scratching the surface of this. This book is an absolute brick, but it is so worth it. I started reading this at the beginning of the month and I flew through like the first 60% of it, and then I put it on pause to read a couple of other things, and then when I got back I flew through the end of it. Like, this was probably the fastest book that I read all month, and it was by far the biggest, like twice as much of anything else this month, and I read this so quickly. This was the only non-slumpy part of my April, I'm not even gonna lie to you guys. The next book I read was Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston, and I gave this book 4 stars. I was actually surprised that I liked this book as much as I did. This is a contemporary romance about the first son of the first female president of the United States and the Prince of England, and it is kind of an enemies to lovers trope situation. Basically, they are caught on camera having a fight, and then to fix the PR nightmare that ensues, they are forced to spend time together and pretend that they're friends, and then find out that they might have a lot more in common than they previously thought. And it was so cute. I didn't expect it to be so cute, and then it was so cute. I'm not a big contemporary reader generally. I'm also not a big romance reader, but this book proved to me that maybe I'm just wrong about those things, and maybe I should just try those genres and I might actually enjoy them. So who knows? I really liked a lot of the characters in this. I love Alex so much, and I related to Alex so hard on a lot of levels, but he's great. But I do want to say that this book like is a rom-com. Like, there are steamy moments, there are sad moments, there are serious moments, but this book is a rom-com through and through. If you're expecting like a super realistic, super serious plot, like that's not what you're getting here. But for what it set out to be, I think it accomplished it perfectly. It didn't like completely blow me away. I really loved it, but I didn't think it was amazing. I think one of the reasons I'm not going to give it 5 stars is because I do have some criticisms of the plot, and I also felt like it was a little bit long. Like, I never felt like the pacing was too bad, but there were a couple of times where I was like, this is going on for a long time and I see where we're going, right? Like, I don't want to say it was predictable in a bad way, but nothing that happened in it was like completely shocking. But I felt like at times it was taking us a little bit to get there, and while I didn't necessarily mind some of what we were doing along the way, it just, I don't know, at times it felt like it could have been condensed a little bit more and accomplished kind of the same thing. But that being said, I read books like this, so like, who am I to talk? And then the final book that I read in the month of April, I know, hopefully this is my shortest wrap up of the year. I don't want to read this little again, but that is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, and I gave this 2 stars, and I'm shocked about it. But hear me out. So this is about a girl named Nora who is living a life that she is not happy with. She has a ton of regrets. She doesn't have a good relationship with her friends or her family anymore. She gets fired from her job. Ultimately, she decides that she's going to attempt to commit suicide. And when doing so, she finds herself in a place called the Midnight Library, which is a library that is full of books. And when she reads them, it allows her to live a life had she made different decisions. And so it kind of gives her a view into a lot of the things that she regrets and ways that her life could have been different. And I think my biggest issue with this book is that that concept sounds awesome. And I think there was so much that could have been done with this, and I felt like it just didn't deliver for me. I felt like from the very first chapter, I could have told you most of the things that she was going to go through and the lessons she was going to learn in each place. I felt like it was extremely predictable. Not that this needed to be like a keep me on the edge of my seat thriller kind of situation, but it was so predictable that I kind of felt like it was boring at times. I also felt like it was very surface level. For a concept like that, I felt like there wasn't a huge amount of depth. It felt like we would go to one of her lives, we would explore this regret, she would go, okay, well maybe it's better it didn't turn out this way because of these reasons, and like, I don't know, it just seemed like there was so much more you could have done with this concept and so much more she could have learned in all of those situations. Whereas it seemed more like, oh, I shouldn't have made that mistake, instead of like learning more about herself in each of these. I don't know. This just like the execution of this idea didn't work for me so well in this one. I felt like there was a lot more that could have been done. Now, I didn't absolutely hate this. I just thought it was kind of okay. There were a couple of chapters that I thought were really interesting and that I liked, but there was also like some kind of attempt to explain what was going on or insinuate that this phenomenon happens to other people, and I actually actively disliked that. I felt like this was a lot more interesting when it was left completely vague and open-ended. So overall, I think this book was just okay, and I gave it 2 stars. But that's it. That is all I managed to read. Like I said, I was slumping pretty hard in April, but we're already a couple of days into May, and so far May has been going much better. Not to mention that the semester ends at the end of this week, and I will have so much time to read, and I have a lot of stuff that I want to get to, so I'm very excited. A little bit sad that I gave myself such a huge TBR in April and then just kind of didn't manage to finish it in the way that I would like. But I'm looking forward to the books I've got coming up, and overall I still found some books this month that I really did enjoy. So yeah, these 3, Red, White, and Royal Blue and Battleground, is what I managed to finish in April. If you've read any of these, please let me know your comments down below, especially about this one and this one, because I feel like those are the 2 that my opinions don't line up with most people, so I'd love to chat with you about them. But I think that's all I've got for you guys today. If you want to keep up with what I'm reading, I have a link to my Goodreads down in the description below, but other than that, I'll see you guys next time.